The hegemony's main fleet arrived 3 days later, and Jake Morrison realized that every military simulation he had ever studied was completely inadequate for the reality of galactic warfare. 10,000 ships stretched across space like a dark constellation, each vessel larger and more heavily armed than anything in the Council's databases. General Carl Brooks arrived from Earth aboard the fastest ship in the human fleet, carrying classified intelligence that changed everything. Jake thought he knew about the enemy. The grizzled military strategist had spent decades preparing for threats that most humans couldn't imagine, and his grim expression suggested the situation was worse than anyone realized. "We've encountered hegemony scouts before," Brooks explained, during an emergency briefing in the human embassy. 20 years ago, they probed our outer colonies and disappeared. We've been tracking their movements ever since, but we kept the information classified to avoid galactic panic. Dr. Nina Walsh, humanities weapons researcher, had been working around the clock to analyze hegemony technology captured during the Kepler battle. Her findings were both fascinating and terrifying. "They don't just build better weapons," she reported to the assembled council leaders. "They weaponize natural phenomena. Gravitational fields, stellar radiation, quantum fluctuations. They've turned the universe itself into an arsenal." The hegemony was led by a species called the Dominators, beings that had achieved technological advancement through conquest and assimilation rather than peaceful development. They viewed the Council's cooperative approach as a sign of weakness and intended to harvest the galaxy's resources without regard for existing civilizations. Captain Steve Carter commanded humanity's Special Forces units, soldiers trained for operations in alien environments against unknown enemies. His teams had been studying hegemony tactics and discovered something crucial. The enemy's strength came from their unity, but that unity was enforced through fear and domination rather than genuine cooperation. The first major battle occurred at the Kepler Junction, a critical hyperspace nexus that controlled access to 12 different star systems. Traditional Council strategy called for massed formations of heavily armed capital ships, exactly the kind of target that hegemony weapons were designed to destroy. Jake implemented a radical alternative based on human military doctrine adapted for galactic warfare. Instead of large fleets engaging in direct combat, he divided Council forces into small, fast-moving units that could strike without warning and disappear before enemy forces could respond effectively. The results surprised everyone, including Jake himself. Human-led units integrated alien capabilities in ways that had never been attempted before. Nixari computational power guided Sylvan biological weapons, while Zephyrian energy manipulation powered hybrid technologies that confused hegemony targeting systems. Captain Carter's special operations teams proved especially effective when working with alien commandos from different species. Mixed units combining human adaptability with alien specialized abilities achieved results that monospecies forces couldn't match. But the war's scope was overwhelming. The hegemony had been preparing for galactic conquest for centuries, building fleets and gathering intelligence while the Council focused on peaceful cooperation. Their technological advantages were significant, and their numbers seemed endless. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough that changed the strategic situation entirely. Working with captured hegemony communication equipment, she deciphered their operational plans and discovered their ultimate objective: control of the galactic quantum network that made faster-than-light travel possible. "They're not just trying to conquer individual systems," Chen explained to the Council's War Cabinet. "They want to cut off entire sectors of the galaxy and control all interstellar commerce. If they succeed, they can starve entire civilizations into submission without firing another shot." The target was a captured Council research station in the Vega system, where scientists had been studying the quantum structures that underlaid hyperspace navigation. Hegemony forces were converting the facility into a network control center that would give them unprecedented power over galactic civilization. Jake realized that the war couldn't be won through military means alone. The hegemony's resources were too vast, their technological advantages too significant, and their willingness to accept casualties too great for any conventional strategy to succeed. Working with Lisa, he developed an unprecedented approach that challenged everything both sides understood about warfare and politics. Instead of trying to defeat the hegemony through superior force, humanity would attempt to divide them by offering their subject species something they had never experienced: genuine partnership. The plan was dangerous to the point of seeming suicidal. Jake would lead a small diplomatic mission deep into hegemony space, hoping to negotiate with enslaved species, while hegemony forces were distracted by the main war effort. Dr. Paul Martinez, humanity's expert in alien psychology, had studied hegemony culture extensively through intercepted communications and prisoner interrogations. His analysis revealed critical weaknesses in their apparently monolithic structure. The dominators rule through fear and resource control, Martinez explained. But their subjects remember what freedom was like before they were conquered. Many of them have been waiting centuries for an opportunity to break free. Captain Roy Thompson would provide security for the diplomatic mission, but his options were limited. A single human ship entering hegemony space would be outnumbered by millions to one. Success would depend on speed, stealth, and the hope that some hegemony subjects were ready to risk everything for freedom. The mission launched while the main war continued across dozens of star systems. Human tactical leadership had transformed Council military effectiveness, but the conflict had reached a strategic stalemate that favored the attackers' long-term objectives. Jake's ship, the diplomatic vessel Endeavor, penetrated hegemony space, using stealth technology borrowed from 6 different Council species. The journey took 2 weeks, during which intelligence reports from the main war grew increasingly grim. The hegemony's target was the Hegemony Council of Dominators, where representatives of conquered species served their overlords in a twisted parody of the Galactic Council. Jake's proposal was simple but revolutionary: offer full Council membership to any hegemony subject species willing to rebel against their masters. Ambassador Helen Grant, humanity's most experienced negotiator, had prepared for months to understand the complex relationships between hegemony species. The political structure was based on layers of domination, with recently conquered species at the bottom and ancient subjects holding positions of limited authority. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Kethmari, a race of natural engineers who had been conquered only 50 years earlier, still remembered their technological independence. When Jake offered them Council membership and protection, they agreed to help sabotage hegemony infrastructure from within. Dr. Martinez's psychological analysis proved accurate. Many hegemony subjects had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Word of the human offer spread through underground networks that the dominators didn't know existed. Captain Thompson coordinated with rebel groups across a dozen different species, providing them with communication equipment and tactical advice for operations against hegemony targets. The rebellion began slowly but spread rapidly as more species realized that liberation was actually possible. The climactic confrontation occurred at the converted research station, where the dominators were attempting to access the Galactic Quantum Network. Jake arrived with a fleet that included not only Council ships but also vessels from former hegemony species who had switched sides. The battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Human coordination allowed the diverse allied fleet to function as a single organism, with each species contributing their unique capabilities to the collective effort. Kethmari engineering teams disabled hegemony defensive systems while Sylvan biological weapons neutralized enemy computer networks. But the real victory came from the realization that the hegemony's apparent strength was actually brittleness. Their unity depended on fear and oppression, which meant that offering genuine alternatives could shatter their entire structure. The dominators faced a choice: continue fighting a war they could no longer win, or negotiate a peace that preserved their core territories while ending their aggressive expansion. The decision came when half their subject species had already joined the rebellion, and their military forces were stretched beyond their capacity to maintain control. Jake found himself negotiating not just the end of a war, but the reconstruction of galactic civilization itself. The peace treaty would need to address the grievances of dozens of species, while establishing new principles for interstellar relations. Lisa coordinated with rebel leaders to establish transition governments for newly liberated species. The process was complex and sometimes chaotic, but it represented something unprecedented: the voluntary dissolution of a galactic empire in favor of cooperative democracy. The war was ending, but Jake knew that the real work was just beginning. Humanity had taken leadership of the Galactic Council during the greatest crisis in its history. The trial of worthiness began at dawn, station time. Jake Morrison stood in the council chamber surrounded by representatives from 43 species, each watching to see if humanity would prove worthy of galactic leadership or fail spectacularly, in front of the entire galaxy. The first test was called the Test of Wisdom. Dr. Ben Foster, humanities quantum physicist, joined Jake at the central platform where a holographic display showed an ancient philosophical problem known as the paradox of the infinite loop. The scenario was complex. Helping one species would inevitably harm another, which would require helping a third species, which would harm the first, creating an endless cycle of intervention and damage. For 3,000 years, council leaders have faced this test, announced the Nexari judge. The correct solution is to calculate which intervention causes the least overall harm and accept the necessary casualties. Jake studied the problem with Foster's help. The traditional approach meant choosing which species would suffer and which would survive, then living with the consequences of that decision. It was the kind of cold calculation that the major powers excelled at, weighing costs and benefits without emotional consideration. "There has to be another way," Foster muttered, running calculations on his portable computer. "The problem assumes you have to work within the existing parameters, but what if you change the parameters themselves?" Jake understood immediately. Instead of choosing which species to help and which to sacrifice, they could restructure the entire scenario. "What if we break the cycle completely?" he asked the judges. "Instead of managing the problem, we solve it." Their proposal was radical: establish a resource-sharing network that eliminated the scarcity causing the conflict in the first place. Rather than fighting over limited resources, all three species would work together to find new sources that benefited everyone. The Nexari judge's crystalline structure flashed with disapproval. The human solution violates established precedent. The test requires choosing the optimal harm reduction strategy, not inventing new alternatives. High botanist Yolandra's leaf-like appendages rustled with what might have been consideration. The human approach is unconventional, but it addresses the root cause rather than managing symptoms. Perhaps innovation has merit. Energy prime vortex plasma field pulsed with uncertainty. Change is dangerous. Traditional methods have maintained stability for millennia. Why risk chaos for unproven theories? The judges spent hours debating humanity's solution while Jake and his team waited. Finally, they announced their decision. Humanity's approach was mathematically sound and philosophically innovative, but it challenged too many established traditions to be fully accepted. Lieutenant Kate Murphy prepared for the test of strength while Jake dealt with the judge's mixed verdict. The military demonstration would pit humanity's small fighter squadron against a simulated attack by vastly superior forces. Traditional strategy called for massed formations and overwhelming firepower, exactly what humans couldn't provide. Murphy studied the tactical scenario from her fighter's cockpit. The simulation involved defending Nexus Station against a fleet of heavy cruisers equipped with advanced weapon systems. Human ships were outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed in every conventional measure of military capability. "We can't fight them head-to-head," Murphy told her pilots over the communication channel. "So we don't fight them at all. We make them fight the station instead." The human fighters spread out in seemingly random patterns, using the station's complex structure to their advantage. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, they led the attacking ships into the station's defensive fields, turning the simulation's own systems against the attackers. Murphy's tactics were unconventional to the point of being considered dishonorable by traditional military standards. She used civilian traffic patterns to mask attack runs, turned cargo bays into weapons platforms, and coordinated with maintenance drones to create confusion among enemy forces. The simulation ended with the IDIB attacking fleet neutralized, but Council military observers were divided about humanity's methods. Some praised the creative use of available resources, while others criticized the violation of established combat protocols. Admiral Hayes watched the tactical analysis with mixed feelings. "Your people won the engagement," he told Jake, "but half the council thinks your methods are cowardly. Traditional warrior cultures value direct confrontation over guerrilla tactics." Before Jake could respond to the military test results, alarms began sounding throughout Nexus Station. The unknown ships detected in the outer system had launched an attack on a council research facility in the nearby Kepler system. This wasn't a simulation or a test. It was real warfare. Captain Rodriguez's escort fleet received emergency orders to respond to the attack, but they were too far away to provide immediate assistance. The research facility was on its own, against an enemy force of unknown capability and hostile intent. The council chamber erupted in chaos as representatives from different species argued about response protocols. The Nexari demanded detailed analysis of enemy capabilities before taking action. The Sylvans wanted to evacuate civilian populations from threatened areas. The Zephyrians suggested gathering more intelligence before committing military resources. While the major powers debated, Jake realized that the test of unity was happening whether the council planned it or not. The crisis required immediate action, but traditional procedures would take hours or days to produce a decision. Dr. Chen intercepted enemy communications during the attack and made a disturbing discovery. "The attackers are calling themselves the Hegemony," she reported to Jake. "They're not council species, and they're demanding that all research facilities surrender their databases immediately." The Hegemony ships were unlike anything in council records. Their hull materials absorbed energy weapons, their shields deflected projectile attacks, and their speed was greater than most council vessels. Worse yet, they seemed to know exactly where to find council installations and how to defeat standard defensive systems. Jake made a decision that would define humanity's role in galactic politics. Instead of waiting for the council to reach consensus through formal procedures, he took command of the crisis response using his authority as a leadership candidate in the trial of worthiness. All available ships converge on Kepler system, he ordered through the council's military communication network. Nexari computational assets coordinate targeting solutions. Sylvan biological sensors provide early warning systems. Zephyrian energy manipulation powers shield harmonics. The order was unprecedented. No single species had ever coordinated a multiracial military response without formal council approval and extensive political negotiation. Jake was essentially creating a new model of leadership based on immediate action rather than careful deliberation. Admiral Hayes coordinated the human contribution to the response fleet, while Lisa worked with alien species to integrate their different capabilities. The result was unlike any military force the Council had ever assembled. Ships from a dozen different species working together under human tactical coordination. The battle at the Kepler research facility lasted 6 hours. Hegemony forces were superior in technology and firepower, but they had planned for traditional Council response patterns. Human-coordinated tactics using integrated alien capabilities caught them completely unprepared. Captain Rodriguez led the combined fleet using the same guerrilla principles that Murphy had demonstrated in the simulation. Instead of direct confrontation, the Allied forces used hit-and-run attacks, ambush tactics, and coordinated strikes that maximized each species' strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. The victory was decisive, but it came with troubling intelligence about the enemy. Dr. Chen's analysis of captured hegemony communications revealed that the attack was only a probing action. The main hegemony fleet was still approaching, and their numbers were far greater than anything the Council had faced before. More disturbing was the discovery of the saboteur who had been undermining humanity's leadership bid. Commander Jackson found evidence linking the anonymous anti-human messages to a hegemony infiltration network that had been operating inside the Council for months. The propaganda campaign wasn't about stopping human leadership, Jackson explained to Jake. It was about keeping the Council divided and unable to respond effectively to the hegemony threat. They wanted us fighting each other instead of preparing for invasion. The revelation changed everything. The trial of worthiness became irrelevant in the face of an existential threat to the entire Galactic Council. Every species that had opposed human leadership now faced the possibility of conquest or annihilation by an enemy they had never heard of. High botanist Yelandra approached Jake after the battle reports were confirmed. The human coordination of multi-species forces was impressive. Perhaps your unconventional methods have merit in unconventional times. Energy Prime Vortex plasma field pulsed with what might have been respect. The human tactical approach achieved victory where traditional methods would have failed. This is worthy of consideration. Even Ambassador Zeth Kalar admitted that humanity's performance had exceeded Nexari calculations. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the transport ship, watching Nexus Station grow larger in the viewport. The massive structure orbited a neutron star, its metal surface gleaming with lights from thousands of different species. After 50 years of membership, humanity still felt like newcomers in the Galactic Council. Jake had been to the station many times, but today felt different. Dr. Lisa Park joined him at the window, carrying a data pad filled with diplomatic protocols. She was the best xenobiologist Earth had, and Jake trusted her knowledge of alien cultures more than anyone else. The message from the Vorthak Dominion came through again this morning, she said quietly. They want to step down from the chairmanship immediately. Jake nodded, still staring at the station. The Vorthak had held the rotating chair for 3 years, longer than most species. Their decision to leave early had shocked everyone. Any word on who they want to replace them? He asked. Lisa smiled in a way that made Jake nervous. That's the interesting part. The council records show something called the neutrality clause. When the major powers cannot agree on leadership, the chair goes to the most adaptively neutral species. She paused. That would be us. Jake turned to face her fully. Us? Humanity? We've only been members for 50 years. Some of these species have been here for thousands of years. That's exactly why we qualify, Lisa explained. We don't belong to any of the major power groups. The Technological Consortium, the Biological Alliance, and the Energy Collective are all fighting each other. None of them can agree on which faction should lead. The transport docked with Nexus Station an hour later. Jake and Lisa made their way through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Tall, crystalline Nexari moved alongside plant-like Sylvans, while energy beings called Zephyrians floated through special containment fields. The diversity never stopped amazing Jake, even after years of diplomatic service. Admiral Rick Hayes was waiting for them at the human embassy section. He was older than Jake, with gray hair and suspicious eyes that had seen too many alien political games. Morrison, he said with a firm handshake. I hope you know what you're getting into. Half the council thinks this neutrality clause is a mistake. What do you mean? Jake asked as they walked toward the briefing room. Ambassador Zeth Kalar of the Nexari called humans primitive upstarts in yesterday's session, Hayes explained. High botanist Yelandra questioned whether humans have the emotional stability for leadership, and Energy Prime Vorthek thinks our military is too weak to matter. Lisa pulled up files on her datapad. The major powers are used to dominating council decisions. They rotate leadership among themselves and keep smaller species in line. Having an outsider take charge threatens their control. Senator Claire Williams was already in the briefing room when they arrived. She represented Earth in the council's political sessions and understood the complex web of alliances better than most humans. The situation is worse than we thought, she said without greeting. 3 different species have filed formal objections to human leadership. They claim we lack the experience and wisdom to guide galactic affairs. Jake sat down heavily. So what are our options? We can decline the nomination, Hayes suggested. Go back to Earth and avoid the whole mess. Or, Lisa said, we can prove them wrong. Before anyone could respond, an alarm chimed through the station. The communication system activated, and a mechanical voice announced an emergency session. Jake and his team hurried to the main council chamber, a vast circular room with seats for representatives from 43 species. The current crisis involved two minor species, the Karathi and the Villani, who were arguing over mining rights in a border system. Their dispute had escalated to the point where both sides were mobilizing military ships. Traditional council procedure would take weeks of formal hearings and ritual negotiations. Jake watched as the major powers began their standard responses. The Nexari suggested technological solutions involving orbital platforms and automated mining systems. The Sylvans proposed biological surveys to determine which species had stronger environmental claims. The Zephyrians wanted to divide the system's energy resources mathematically. None of the solutions addressed the real problem. Jake stood up from the human section and requested permission to speak. The chamber fell silent as species turned to look at the representative from the newest member world. With respect to the honored delegates, Jake began. Perhaps we could try a different approach. He had everyone's attention now, including some hostile stares from the major powers. Instead of deciding who gets what, why don't we ask both species what they actually need? The suggestion caused murmurs throughout the chamber. Ambassador Zethkalar's crystalline form flashed with disapproval. The human delegate does not understand proper procedure, the Nexari said in mechanical tones. Resource allocation requires technical analysis, not emotional appeals. But Jake was already walking toward the center of the chamber where the Karathi and Villani delegates sat in separate sections. He had studied their cultures during the flight to Nexus Station. The Karathi needed rare metals for their industrial expansion, while the Villani required energy crystals for their growing population. Your people don't want the same things, Jake said to both delegates. The Karathi need metals from the asteroid belts. The Villani need crystals from the gas giant's moons. The system has both resources in different locations. The Karathi delegate, a scaled humanoid named Kekstar, looked surprised. The human speaks truth. We have no use for energy crystals. The Villani delegate, a floating jellyfish-like being called Yilmoth, pulsed with agreement. Our people cannot process heavy metals. We seek only crystal formations. Within an hour, Jake had helped both species negotiate a resource-sharing agreement. The Karathi would mine asteroids, while the Villani harvested crystal moons. Both sides would provide security for each other's operations and share transportation costs. The major powers watched in stunned silence as the crisis resolved itself through simple direct communication rather than complex political maneuvering. Hi, botanist. Yolandra's leaf-like appendages rustled with what might have been approval. Even Energy Prime Vortex plasma field seemed less agitated than usual. Ambassador Zethkalar approached Jake after the session ended. The human method was unconventional, the Nexari admitted, but effective. Perhaps there is merit to this adaptive neutrality concept. Back in the human embassy, Lisa was analyzing data from the Council's archives. Jake, you need to see this, she said urgently. I've been tracking communication patterns across the station. Someone has been sending anonymous messages to various species, warning them about human leadership. Jake looked at the intercepted transmissions she had discovered. The messages were sophisticated, designed to look like they came from concerned council members. They suggested that human chairmanship would lead to aggressive expansion and the domination of peaceful species. These aren't random complaints, Lisa continued. They're part of a coordinated campaign to undermine our nomination. Someone doesn't want humanity in the chair, and they're willing to use deception to stop us. Hayes studied the message patterns. The timing is suspicious. These communications started right after the Vorthak announced their resignation. Someone knew about the neutrality clause before we did. Senator Williams pulled up voting records on her terminal. The formal vote for chairmanship happens in 3 days. We need to figure out who's behind this campaign and why they want to keep us out of power. Jake looked around the room at his team. 50 years ago, humanity had been alone among the stars. Now they were being offered leadership of the galaxy's most important political body. The opportunity was incredible, but the opposition was already organizing against them. We came here to represent Earth's interests, Jake said finally. But maybe that's not enough anymore. Maybe it's time to represent something bigger. Lisa nodded. The smaller species are watching us. If we can prove that leadership means service instead of domination, we might change how the entire council operates. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Long-range sensors detected unknown ships gathering at the edge of council space. The vessels didn't match any known designs, and they weren't responding to communication attempts. Whatever was coming, the Galactic Council would need strong leadership to face it. Jake Morrison looked out at Nexus Station one more time, knowing that the next few days would determine not just humanity's future, but the future of every species in the galaxy. The voting ceremony for council leadership had never been more complicated. Jake Morrison sat in the human delegation section, watching as species after species presented their worthiness codex to the assembly. Each document represented centuries of cultural achievement, technological advancement, and philosophical development. Humanity had 3 weeks to create something that would convince 43 alien civilizations they deserved to lead. Commander Pete Jackson stood behind Jake's chair, his military bearing obvious even in diplomatic surroundings. He had arrived that morning with intelligence reports about the anonymous messages targeting human leadership. The propaganda is getting worse, he whispered to Jake during a recess. 6 more species received communications questioning human motives. Dr. Amy Chen worked frantically at a portable computer station, trying to trace the source of the hostile messages. She was humanity's best linguistic specialist, and if anyone could break through alien encryption methods, it would be her. The messages are sophisticated, she reported to the human team. Whoever is sending them understands both human communication patterns and alien psychology. Lisa Park led the effort to create humanity's worthiness codex. Instead of following traditional formats that emphasized military conquest and technological superiority, she decided to showcase something different. Our strength isn't in dominating others, she explained to the writing team. It's in bringing others together. The Human Codex became a celebration of diversity. It included art from every continent on Earth, scientific discoveries that benefited all humanity, and philosophical works that emphasized cooperation over competition. Most importantly, it documented humanity's short but significant history in the Galactic Council, showing how human mediation had resolved conflicts between other species. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded the small human escort fleet stationed near Nexus Station. His ships were outgunned by most Council vessels, but they had proven their worth in several border patrol missions. We're getting strange readings from the outer system, he reported to Jake during a security briefing. Ships that don't match any Council designs just sitting there watching us. The formal presentations began with the major powers. Ambassador Zethkalar displayed the Nexari Technological Codex, a holographic showcase of computational achievements that made human computers look like stone tools. The presentation lasted 4 hours and included mathematical proofs that most species couldn't understand. High botanist Yolandra followed with the Sylvan Biological Codex, demonstrating how plant-based intelligence had shaped ecosystems across dozens of worlds. Her people had created living cities that grew from seeds and space habitats that breathed like forests. The beauty of their achievements left many delegates speechless. Energy Prime Vortex presentation for the Zephyrians was pure spectacle. The plasma being transformed the chamber's energy systems into a light show that illustrated their mastery over fundamental forces. They could travel between stars without ships, communicate through quantum fluctuations, and power entire civilizations with their life energy. When humanity's turn came, Jake walked to the center of the chamber carrying a simple data pad. No holographic displays, no energy manipulations, no technological marvels that defied understanding. Just a human telling a story. Honored delegates, Jake began. We don't offer you superior technology or ancient wisdom. We offer you something else entirely. The chamber was quiet, expecting another boring presentation about human achievements. Instead, Jake showed them the Karathi-Villani mining agreement from the previous week. This conflict seemed impossible to solve using traditional methods. But when we stopped arguing about who deserved what, and started asking what each side actually needed, the solution became obvious. He moved on to other examples. Human diplomats had helped the crystalline Nexari communicate with the gaseous Zephyrians, by developing translation matrices that converted mathematical concepts into energy patterns. Human psychologists had resolved a centuries-old misunderstanding between two species who had been interpreting each other's religious ceremonies as acts of war. "We don't claim to be better than anyone else," Jake continued. "We claim to be different. And sometimes being different is exactly what you need." The presentation included testimonials from smaller species who had benefited from human mediation. The insectoid Vectari praised human flexibility in adapting to their hive mind communication style. The aquatic Mordani appreciated human understanding of their liquid-based culture. Even some members of the major powers admitted that human approaches had achieved results where traditional methods had failed. But the major powers remained skeptical. Ambassador Zethkalar questioned whether human emotional decision-making could handle the complex calculations required for galactic governance. High botanist Yil Andra worried that human individualism conflicted with the collective harmony needed for council leadership. Energy Prime Vortex suggested that humans lacked the energy reserves necessary for long-term leadership. The first vote resulted in deadlock. The Technological Consortium supported Nexari leadership, the Biological Alliance backed the Sylvans, and the Energy Collective promoted the Zephyrians. None of the major factions could achieve the two-thirds majority required for victory. Smaller species were divided. Some supported humanity's fresh approach, while others feared the consequences of choosing an inexperienced species for leadership. The vote tallies showed exactly what everyone expected: perfect gridlock. Under council law, a deadlocked vote triggered the trial of worthiness. Instead of political maneuvering, humanity would have to prove their capabilities through practical demonstrations. The trial consisted of 3 tests designed to evaluate leadership potential: wisdom, strength, and unity. Jake accepted the challenge, knowing that humanity's chances were slim. The tests had been designed by and for the major powers. They emphasized the kinds of capabilities that humans lacked: superior technology, overwhelming military force, and the ability to impose order through dominance. Dr. Chen made a breakthrough while the trial preparations were underway. She had finally cracked the encryption on the anonymous messages targeting humanity. "The source is using advanced artificial intelligence to generate believable propaganda," she reported to Jake. "But there are linguistic patterns that suggest the programmer is familiar with human communication styles." The discovery was disturbing. Someone with access to both human and alien communication methods was deliberately trying to undermine humanity's leadership bid. The saboteur was working from inside the council itself, using their knowledge of multiple species to create division and conflict. Captain Rodriguez brought more troubling news from the outer system. "The unknown ships are moving closer to Nexus Station. My tactical analysis suggests they're not council vessels, and they're not responding to any communication attempts. Whatever they are, they're getting ready for something." Lisa studied the ship configurations from long-range sensor data. "These designs don't match anything in council databases. The hull materials and energy signatures are completely unfamiliar. Either someone has developed new technology in secret, or these ships come from outside council space entirely." The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Unknown ships appear just as humanity faces its greatest political challenge, while anonymous messages try to divide the council from within. Jake began to suspect that all these events were connected, part of a larger plan to weaken or destroy the Galactic Council. Commander Jackson increased security around the human delegation, but his resources were limited. If someone was planning to eliminate human leadership through violence, they had plenty of opportunities on a station filled with dozens of alien species, each with different biology and different definitions of acceptable behavior. The trial of worthiness would begin in 2 days. Humanity would face tests designed to prove their fitness for leadership, while unknown enemies gathered in the darkness beyond the station, and saboteurs worked to turn council species against each other. Jake looked around the chamber at representatives from 43 different worlds, each with their own history, culture, and dreams for the future. For 50 years, the council had managed to maintain peace through careful balance between the major powers. That balance was breaking down, and humanity found itself at the center of the crisis. "We didn't ask for this responsibility," Jake told his team during their final planning session. "But maybe that's exactly why we're the right choice. Every other species here has their own agenda, their own faction to support. We're the only ones who don't have anything to gain from council leadership except the chance to serve." Lisa nodded. "The smaller species understand that. They've been marginalized by the major powers for centuries. If we can prove that leadership means empowering others instead of dominating them, we might create something entirely new." The next morning brought word that 3 more species had formally objected to human leadership. The propaganda campaign was working, turning council members against each other and undermining the cooperative spirit that had kept the galaxy peaceful for generations. But Jake Morrison wasn't ready to give up. Humanity had come too far to surrender now. 6 months after the Hegemony War ended, Jake Morrison stood in the renovated council chamber looking out at representatives from over 200 species. The chamber had been expanded 3 times to accommodate all the new members, and translation systems worked overtime to handle languages that had never been heard in civilized space before. Ambassador Helen Grant had spent those months negotiating the most complex peace treaty in galactic history. The document established new principles for interstellar relations. No species could be conquered or forced into subjugation, but all species had the right to seek resources and territory through peaceful means and mutual agreement. The former Hegemony territory had been transformed into dozens of independent governments, each choosing their own path toward democracy and cooperation. Some species joined the Galactic Council immediately, while others needed time to develop stable institutions after centuries of oppression. Dr. Paul Martinez worked with transition teams across the former hegemony space, helping newly liberated species establish governments that reflected their unique cultures and needs. The process was sometimes chaotic and always challenging, but it represented genuine self-determination for beings who had never experienced freedom. Captain Roy Thompson commanded the peacekeeping forces that maintained stability during the transition. Period. His mixed units of humans and aliens had become the model for Council military operations, proving that cooperation was more effective than any single species acting alone. The Kethmari, who had been crucial to the rebellion's success, became humanity's strongest allies in the expanded council. Their engineering expertise helped rebuild war-damaged systems, while their experience with resistance movements provided valuable insights for other liberation efforts. Jake found himself in the unprecedented position of chairing a council that included former enemies alongside longtime allies. The Dominators themselves had been granted limited membership after agreeing to democratic reforms and reparations for their conquest victims. Dr. Nina Walsh's weapons research had taken an unexpected turn after the war. Instead of developing more destructive technologies, she focused on defensive systems and non-lethal alternatives that could maintain peace without threatening civilian populations. Her innovations were shared freely with all council members, establishing a new precedent for technological cooperation. Senator Claire Williams had been elected as humanity's permanent representative to the expanded council, but the position had evolved beyond anything previous representatives had experienced. She now coordinated policy for a galactic government that included species with radically different concepts of law, justice, and social organization. The biggest challenge was economic integration. Former hegemony species had been part of a resource extraction system that valued raw materials over finished products. Lisa Park led efforts to establish fair trade relationships that allowed each species to contribute their strengths while receiving the resources they needed for development. Commander Pete Jackson's security forces faced threats unlike anything in previous council history. Some former hegemony officers refused to accept the new order and continued guerrilla operations against liberated territories. More concerning were reports of other aggressive civilizations beyond the galaxy's edge, watching to see if the Council's expansion made it stronger or more vulnerable. Dr. Amy Chen had become the Council's chief intelligence coordinator, managing information flows between species that had been enemies just months before. Her linguistic skills proved essential for establishing trust between groups that had never communicated as equals. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Several species struggled with the transition from authoritarian rule to democratic participation. Others found it difficult to work with former oppressors who now claimed to support peaceful cooperation. Captain Steve Carter's special operations teams evolved into something entirely new. Rapid response units that could deploy to any council territory to prevent conflicts before they escalated into warfare. His mixed species teams had become legendary for their ability to resolve seemingly impossible situations through creative problem-solving. General Carl Brooks oversaw the integration of former hegemony military forces into council peacekeeping operations. The process required careful screening to identify officers who genuinely supported democratic values, while excluding those who remained loyal to the old system of conquest and domination. The formal confirmation of Jake's permanent chairmanship came during a ceremony that celebrated the council's evolution from a regional alliance into a truly galactic government. Representatives from 237 species voted unanimously to confirm humanity's leadership role. But Jake's speech to the assembled delegates focused not on human achievements, but on the collective success of all council members working together. "We didn't win this war through superior technology or military might," he said to the vast chamber. "We won because we offered something that every sentient being wants, the chance to choose their own destiny." The ceremony included cultural presentations from dozens of newly liberated species, each sharing traditions that had been suppressed under hegemony rule. The diversity was overwhelming and beautiful, demonstrating the creative potential that had been wasted under authoritarian control. Lisa Park's biological research had revealed fascinating connections between species that had been separated by hegemony barriers for centuries. Some groups had evolved from common ancestors but developed along different paths due to their isolation. Others had independently developed similar solutions to environmental challenges, suggesting underlying patterns in galactic evolution. Dr. Ben Foster's quantum physics research contributed to the reconstruction of the galactic communication network. The new system was more resilient and inclusive, allowing even the most technologically primitive species to participate in interstellar dialogue and commerce. Lieutenant Kate Murphy had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the Council's exploration fleets. Her ships carried mixed crews representing dozens of species, exploring regions of space that had been closed to outsiders during hegemony rule. The discoveries were remarkable: ancient ruins, unique ecosystems, and previously unknown civilizations that had survived in hiding. The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Trade between council members had increased by over 300% as former barriers were eliminated and new relationships were established. Species that had been forced to provide raw materials for hegemony war machines now developed their own manufacturing capabilities in creative industries. Education became a priority as liberated species worked to recover knowledge that had been suppressed or lost during conquest. The Council established universities and research centers throughout former hegemony space, staffed by volunteers from established member species who shared their expertise freely. The most significant change was psychological. Generations of beings who had lived under authoritarian rule were learning what it meant to make their own choices and participate in democratic governance. The process was sometimes difficult and always complex, but it represented genuine liberation from centuries of oppression. Jake often reflected on the irony that humanity's greatest achievement came not from proving their superiority over other species, but from recognizing that every species had valuable contributions to make. The Council's strength lay not in the dominance of any single group, but in the voluntary cooperation of diverse beings working toward common goals. The final scene of this chapter in galactic history took place in Nexus Station's observation deck, where Jake had first seen the council chamber months before. Children from dozens of species played together in integrated schools while their parents worked side by side in the expanded government complex. The diversity was remarkable. Crystalline Nexari children learning alongside organic humanoids, gaseous Zephyrian juveniles communicating with plant-like sylvan saplings, and former hegemony species that had never interacted peacefully now forming friendships that would shape the next generation of galactic citizens. Jake watched the children and realized that this was humanity's true legacy. Not the war they had won or the position they had achieved, but the future they had made possible for every species in the galaxy. The Council had evolved from an alliance of convenience into something unprecedented in galactic history. A genuine democracy where every voice mattered, and every species could contribute to the common good. Admiral Hayes joined Jake at the observation deck, looking out at the bustling station that now served as the capital of a galactic civilization. "You know," he said quietly, "when we first received that invitation to lead the Council, I thought it was either a mistake or a trap." Jake nodded. Maybe it was both. But maybe that's exactly what we needed. Sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as impossible challenges. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the communication center. Long-range sensors had detected signals from beyond the galactic rim, other civilizations watching the Council's transformation and considering whether to make contact. The universe was larger than anyone had imagined, and humanity's leadership of the Galactic Council was just the beginning of even greater adventures.